Welcome to Coffee with the Flat Earther. Today I'm talking with Pete Svarrior from the Flat Earth Society. Hi, Pete.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've seen you online a lot in the forums at tfes.org. It's good to talk to you in person. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, let's see. What am I comfortable with? That's always the difficult question. I am currently a postgraduate student. I'm from a computer science background, and I've been getting more and more involved in education and teaching. I've been involved in the Flat Earth movement in pretty much the past decade. I think I've joined about late 2009, early 2010. And, obviously I've since become a moderator and fairly active member of the Flat Earth Society, and I've been trying to spread that message as far as it can.
Okay. Can you tell us more about the current version of the Flat Earth Society?
Could you be a little bit more specific? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking.
So I look on the forums and I see, there's two websites. So on theflatearthsociety.org, I see posts going back to 2007, though on the website it says the site's been up since 2004. And then there's a second website, tfes.org, which is the one that I'm mostly active on. I have accounts on both. And that goes back to 2013 or so.
Yeah, that's about right. So the story there is an odd one. So it's at this point, I think it would be fair to say that there are two Flat Earth societies, even though I don't think either society thinks of it that way. I think if you ask one of the societies, they'll tell you that there is the legitimate society, which is obviously themselves, and then there are those other people who are also trying to be the Flat Earth Society. And if I'm no different. If you ask me which society is legitimate, I'm gonna tell you that it's the one I'm involved in. But
of course,
to try and sort of put myself back from that and to try and present it from as neutral a standpoint as I can. Before 2013, there was only one website, and the core memberships of both of them were on the same website. And there were multiple disagreements within the society, and most of them were actually nothing to do with the Flat Earth stuff or with any conspiracy stuff or anything like that. It was actually petty stuff like how to best manage the website or how to best manage the society. So really administrative and technical stuff that was sort of brewing and growing until eventually it hit a critical mass, I think. I don't remember exactly what happened, but some botched maintenance resulted in a large amount of posts disappearing overnight, and people coming back and realizing that the discussions they were having were not there. And that's sort of where people like, mostly Parsifal, I joined very shortly afterwards, decided enough is enough. It's time to set up our own website and do things the way that we think is correct. So we have, and originally there was no intention of any larger split or any more lasting division. It was just a case of we felt that the other website was falling apart and we still wanted something that we can use, so we just made one. But I think that wasn't seen very kindly by the people in charge of the other website, and the rest is just an endless he said this, she said that kind of unresolvable dispute. So as it stands, there are two websites, effectively two societies, which have now taken their own course. The community sort of split in two directions, and they picked their sides and they're trying to make the best out of the situation.
Okay. So there's older societies, incarnations back. I think Samuel Shelton.
Yeah. Shenton.
Yeah, and back farther than that, even to the early parts of the 1900s. Some newsletters and somebody's house burned down in the 80s or something. Is there any relation to that? Any consistency, or is it kind of independent of that version?
I mean, it's It's not an easy question to answer. In a sense, you could go back to the Universal Zetetic Society and Samuel Rowbotham, and then that eventually turning into the Flat Earth Society, well, the International Flat Earth Research Society, called the Flat Earth Society for short, which effectively fell apart when Samuel Shenton's house burnt down, and then it was the other Flat Earth Society that's still currently active that attempted to sort of pick it up where that left off. So it wasn't so much that there is continuity insofar that someone, explicitly said, yes, we, the old society, approve this new society being a continuation, but rather it's trying to restore as much of the work that they've done, try to provide it a new home, create an archive of things that happened in the past, and continue that work. So the relation is indirect. It's, those people saw the previous societies and thought, let's try and bring this back together, let's try and rebuild what has fallen apart.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And I've looked at the library section on tfes.org, and there's a good amount of information there.
Mm-hmm.
Rowbotham, Lady Blount.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. A bunch of really good stuff in there. If anybody wanted to read, I've read, for example, all of Earth, Not a Globe. Are there like official positions, board members, paid memberships, that kind of stuff?
So one of the things that we did when we were presented with the fact that there are going to be two societies, it's not looking like we're going to merge back into a single entity anytime soon, is we tried to avoiding the mistakes that we felt caused the split in the first place. And one of the problems that we had identified, or at least we feel was part of the problem, is that there was a fairly rigid leadership structure, and they had a president, they had a vice president, and realistically, if you couldn't get them to agree your point, then whatever it is you wanted to happen wasn't going to be happening. We've taken the polar opposite approach and effectively said, there's a few of us who are running the website, and in that sense, I guess we have some sort of power, but in the end of the day, if someone who's part of the community wants to do something, and if it is popular within the community, then they should just go ahead and do it and not really wait for us to say anything, because we don't want to have that sort of power. So we are deliberately avoiding official positions, and we are avoiding a particularly rigid leadership structure. So for example, I've been involved in moderation, I've been involved in writing code, I've been involved in running some of the social media accounts, but that is purely because I said, I can do it. Is there anyone else who wants to do it? And where there was, we teamed up. Where there wasn't, I just kind of carried on and did it. So I guess I'm reluctant to say it, but I guess you could call us a commune.
Sure. You don't live together.
No, but more in
a virtual online commune.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah. But one where the leadership structure is very fluid and kind of just revolves around who's doing what. For example, I used to be the lead person doing stuff with the wiki, and I have since completely lost interest in that, and it's by and large been Tom doing it. And it just kind of happened. There was no conversation around it. There wasn't are we handing over the wiki to Tom now? Is he now in charge? It was just a case of I stopped doing it and he started doing it, and it seems to work just fine.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning and clarifying who Tom is.
Yes, that would be Tom Bishop, a fairly well-established Flat Earther in the Flat Earth Society, one of the key figures that's been around since pretty much as far as I remember the Flat Earth Society had existed. I think even before both groups kind of blew up on the internet, he's been there, and he's always been quite recognized in terms of always being there and defending the Flat Earth arguments.
Yeah, and looking when I searched back in the other website, I saw his post going back all the way to the beginning. So he's certainly been active. So, hey Tom, if you want to talk sometime, it'd be good to have you on, like Pete here. Something that so I've been involved on both forums, mostly tfes.org, because the moderation is much, much better.
I'll take the compliment.
Yes, it's, and hey, and I haven't got in trouble myself from you, so it was well deserved.
Who hasn't?
So,
Let's be realistic.
Exactly.
If you go through the moderation log, it's just Pete has issued a warning to this person, Pete has issued a warning to that person, and then you've got the endless threads of just people questioning me and saying like, "Are you sure you're not just trying to be difficult?"
Yeah.
But that's forum moderation for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was so I've been on there for a long time before I even watched the first YouTube video that I watched. I was on because I just searched for it, and I didn't want to watch a video. I wanted to read, and I wanted to be involved. So that's where I went. And I kind of tapered off a little bit once I started making some YouTube videos. But I still go on there and read things and participate some. But I was confused though when I first started interacting with some people from YouTube, because they had a very different, the Flat Earthers on YouTube had a very different view of the Flat Earth Society than I thought they would. I always hear the same words. They always say controlled opposition.
Yes.
Can you, because I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. Can you expand on what you think that is?
It takes a little bit of history, and I mean, I'll be upfront and I'll say that I don't understand all of it, because unfortunately the people who feel that way are also the people who are not going to talk to me. They're going to tell me to go away in the nicest possible terms, because they feel that, you know, we are a group that is attempting to spread disinformation or anything along those lines, and thus they feel that engaging us would be detrimental. To my understanding, and this is piecing together the information that I was actually able to gather, this started with Eric Dubay. And as much as he's a well-established flat earther now, that wasn't always the case. He's actually a relative newcomer to the scene compared to things like the Flat Earth Society, which, you know, whether you entertain the 2004 or the 2009 launch date or our 2013, Eric is more of a, I think, 3-ish years ago kind of person.
Yeah.
And when he came into the scene and he quite quickly started building a following, he gathered some attention at the Flat Earth Society forum, and, you know, some people were really quite excited about him. I think Falk went as far as to call him the Flat Earth Messiah or something like that. If you look through threads from around that time, I think you might find a few threads which discuss his arrival and, you know, and are quite upbeat and quite enthusiastic about the fact that Eric has made it to the scene and that he's been making some headway. And it didn't take particularly long until he suddenly lashed out against us and published a fairly loud article saying that the Flat Earth Society is controlled opposition, where his main lead argument was that he was trying to I'm really sorry, I got lost in my words. He was trying to suggest that we are directly connected to Leo Ferrari and the Flat Earth Society of Canada, which was a satirical group that a Canadian academic set up to kind of push a very solipsistic kind of logic. And it was all very tongue-in-cheek. It was quite intelligent humor, but it was satire nonetheless. And I think the logic that he was trying to present is that groups that call themselves the Flat Earth Society are connected to that group, and
just any
by name, yes,
yeah.
And any group that would be legitimate would call itself the International Flat Earth Research Society. In reality, both names were in use. The International Flat Earth Research Society was the full name, and if I look at my membership certificates from the other society, the flatearthsociety.org one, it has both titles on it. It has Flat Earth Society and International Flat Earth Research Society on it. So by making that connection, by saying, we are descendants of a satirical group, therefore we are also not serious, and combining that with things like, if you currently try to look for flat Earth content, you are going to see one of the two groups' content above most anything else. It's quite easy to build the narrative of, therefore Google must be in on it, and they must be pushing this content above anything else. Thus, it's all a conspiracy, and we are the bad guys. I don't really know what to say about that, other than no, I very much wish that someone was paying me a lot of stuff to say these things, but they don't. They really don't. I would have probably quit my other jobs.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one that gets accused of that, of course, and I myself have, and I've heard other people. My answer is always, hey, if you know where I can apply, I'm ready, because I could use the money, of course. Nobody ever tells me where.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. But I mean, it is something that sort of. I don't want to say that it plagues a reputation, because I think that's too much, but there are some groups within the Flat Earth community who will simply not engage us because of the fact that early on you get this warning, be careful about those guys, they're controlled opposition, or they're a conspiracy, or something along those lines. But I would say, if you look outside of Twitter and I guess YouTube, then you don't really see those people. I think they are a relatively small but very vocal group that pushes that narrative.
Yeah, there's certainly different flavors. Twitter, the people on Twitter are all very similar, and they tend to be biblical flat earthers, and they're all flat and stationary. The stationary part being important. Which I know
very
isn't
strongly emphasized by them.
Yeah, which I know isn't. I know for pretty sure that you don't take that. So I also think my conjecture was maybe because it's a forum and anybody can join, like myself. Somebody comes in, asks a question, and somebody like me might come in and say, "Well, here's what I think," which is not the right answer, not the flat Earth answer. In fact, but still, I'm a member because I'm on the forum and I'm a member on the forum. So
yes, so that's I have effectively heard two complaints from the few people who are willing to ever engage us, and the fact that yes, there are too many round earthers and they are allowed too much freedom and this, that, and the other, which I never understood. I feel if you are going to try and promote an idea that is currently alternative, there's no other way to describe it, you have to engage with people who don't agree with you. If you're only engaging with people who agree with you, then you've just created an echo chamber and you're not making any progress. But the second complaint that is very common, and probably the main one actually, is the non-stationary aspect of it. I know many people on Twitter who have practically devoted their entire activity to commenting on every single post we make and questioning the idea that the Earth is flat and not stationary and that it is accelerating upwards and that kind of stuff. It's really funny, especially when you have control of a fairly large Twitter account, and even when you get so many comments, there are a few people who stand out just because they are on every single post saying exactly the same thing. And as far as I can tell, they're not using bots either, because they write the same thing, but they write it differently every single time, beyond the level where an automated solution could do it. So they are people who are really, really passionate about saying, we disagree about this particular aspect of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But then,
Wow.
but then the funny thing is that some of them have had conversations with me. They've messaged me via Twitter DMs, and I've responded to them saying, if you would like for the Flat Earth Society to document the alternative, the stationary model, provide me with a sufficient description. I'm not going to write it because I don't understand it. If you give me a description, I will copy it, paste it, add a tiny bit of formatting, and it'll be on our wiki, and other people can read it. So you don't have to complain about the fact that we don't represent the stationary model. And so far, I've got nothing.
Oh.
I've had people who said, oh, we'll get back to you after Thanksgiving. It's quite a little bit of time after Thanksgiving, and they're still posting on my tweets, still asking me questions, but they're not actually contributing.
Well, there's plenty that do watch my videos, and I've gotten some comments. So I'd encourage anybody that disagrees with the Flat Earth Society, get a contact Pete and take them up on the offer.
It's an honest and open offer. If I can receive a reasonable write-up of roughly the same standard as other pages on the wiki, which is probably not going into extreme detail, but at least trying to cover it for someone who hasn't read about the subject before, and if I can, with very minor edits, put it up, I will. And that is a promise that I can make right here, right now.
All right. Well, good. Maybe that'll something will come of that.
Here's hoping.
I not that I'm in support of Flat Earth, but I think it's interesting, and having a broader representation, I think, is great. So,
I think especially bearing in mind that, yes, currently if you search for Flat Earth, it is us that you'll find. If you search for Flat Earth, it's usually our FAQ that comes up on Google.
Yeah.
I think it would be to everyone's benefit to be able to present that case, even if we mark it as, something that is alternative to the Flat Earth Society's mainstream beliefs. It would still be of great benefit to everyone who's looking into the subject. But it has to be someone who actually believes that flavor of Flat Earth who writes it, because I'm going to get it wrong, and then the accusations will roll in. It'll be like, he's misrepresenting stationary Earth on purpose.
Yeah.
So I just want to get a good write-up.
Yeah, if you get attribution, then they can go to that person. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, let's. I could talk forever about the Flat Earth Society. Being on it for as long as I have been. It's a good place, and I like it. And Tom Bishop, he says especially when non-Flat Earthers ask him questions about, well, what about this? He's like, well, you are the Flat Earth Society too, because you're on here.
Yeah.
Let's and I'm like, yeah, we are. Fine.
Honestly, that's what we're about. We want to have these discussions, and we have gone through a very conscious effort to reform into something closer to a debate club, to acknowledge the fact that there are people who will discuss Flat Earth as a hypothetical possibility rather than a sincere belief they hold. We don't really want to hold them back. If they are honest about what they're saying, and if they don't try to pretend that they hold beliefs that they don't, if they want to make arguments for either side, we are happy with that.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I want to clarify a couple things just about you. But before that, I got my coffee here, and I got a new mug. Let's see if we can see that. This is the Creaky Blinder mug. He's a YouTuber that does covers conspiracy theories and flat Earth theory videos. So, even though you're not on camera, I'll assume you're drinking coffee, even though it's maybe late at night.
Let's say it's coffee. Let's not go into that.
That works.
I am indeed drinking.
All right. So for you, what is your take? Like, do you support a map?
Okay. Let's start with what is my take, because I think that will influence some of the discussion.
Sure.
I am probably much less of a Flat Earth evangelist than most people in the Flat Earth community. I I am a flat Earth believer, but I do not consider it to be some sort of unquestionable truth that must be spread no matter what the cost. I don't view this as a fight against the round Earth model so much as I am particularly taken aback by the decline in critical thinking in society. And that's on both sides. I've met some flat earthers who have no idea how to think critically, and I've met some round earthers who simply decided that because they have been told that the earth is round, it must be, and there is no point in trying to investigate it or have any discussion about the subject. It's just true. It just has to happen. So this is sort of my focus. My focus is much more on encouraging people to engage in a sort of extreme skepticism and question anything that they are presented with, rather than necessarily push that the earth is flat. As for a map, I'm probably quite boring. I would probably tentatively support what you guys would call the azimuthal equidistant map.
Okay.
But it is a tentative support, and it is just a map that appears to match the majority of observations as of now. I strongly doubt that that would be the final ultimate flat Earth map if it came to it.
Okay. How about a dome? Popular one.
That is a more difficult question. I haven't seen any evidence of there being a dome, though I haven't seen any evidence of there not being a dome. But my default assumption would be, if I haven't seen evidence of it, then I will not take a strong stance for it.
Okay. Infinite plane or edge?
Similar. We have no reason to believe that there is an edge. We have no reason to believe that there isn't an edge. Nobody really went that far into the Earth. I do believe that it goes farther than mainstream maps would show you. So I believe that there is a little bit more to Antarctica. But what's beyond that, I wouldn't want to speculate. It is simply something I don't know.
Okay. Maybe going off of what Admiral Byrd said, is that kind of...
I'm not entirely
sure. He said there's
what
something
referencing.
Past the North Pole.
North Pole wouldn't be very helpful here.
Sorry, South Pole.
Potentially. I wasn't drawing it from that. No.
Okay. All right, and then are the sun and moon physical objects? Do they have an elevation, specific place?
What would the alternative to a physical object be?
Well, there's plenty. People say some just punt and say, "Well, we don't know," and therefore you can't tie us down to anything. Others say it's a projection on the dome.
Right.
And of course, if you don't know if there's a dome or not, so.
But surely a projection would still have a source. So surely there would still be a physical source to that projection.
Yeah, and there'd be a source of the light, right? So if it was projected or reflected, we wouldn't know necessarily where that projection or reflection came from, but we'd know where the reflection or projection, like it happened, where the light started traveling towards us.
I think that's probably quite close to my belief. I would say that the light of the sun and the moon, would I call them a projection? Possibly. I would say that there must be a light source for both of these, but I do not necessarily think that the light that we do see is being sent directly from the object. I think it might be reflected off something.
Okay. Well, of course, a lot of people think the moon is just reflecting light from the sun, and there are some flat earthers that say that too. Right, there's some that say it's independent and the moon produces its own light, and I find that pretty silly. There's, that's a Nobel Prize right there, to have light that produces cold. Somebody were to actually pursue that. Okay, so and so it seems like this isn't your take isn't coming from the Bible.
No.
No,
I would say I'm quite far away from the Bible. I was raised Christian, I was raised Catholic, but I think I think my parents were probably already not strongly religious. They were probably more a byproduct of my grandparents. And by the time it's reached me, the religious upbringing was very much not there. It kind of just remained as a cultural artifact, and I quite quickly moved away. And I would probably identify myself as agnostic these days.
Okay. And you know, the debunker community is a lot of them are atheists. Just I think by coincidence, I don't know.
I mean, I think it's something that goes with a strong sense of skepticism, and you know, regardless of what conclusion you reach, if you are taught to question just about anything, or if you reach the conclusion by yourself that you should question just about anything, you will probably get to the point where religion is easy pickings for that sort of questioning.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, and I was somebody on Twitter was I was posting something about flight paths, and they a religious flat earther, and they messaged me that said I needed to repent. Although the conversation wasn't religious at all, but it seemed to me that they thought that because I thought the Earth wasn't flat, that I need to repent. Not the other, like, believe in Jesus, you need to repent, right? Like, this was the key thing, not something else. That if you don't believe it's flat, then you're going to hell. I found that very offensive. And then the person blocked me, which, like, why would you? It was just echo chamber is what they're looking for.
Yeah, so. It's a problem. I should probably ask, are you religious?
I am not an atheist. I am not an agnostic. So, yeah, I certainly have religious beliefs.
Okay, that doesn't necessarily answer my entire question. Are you Christian? Something else?
Yes, I am. I am a Christian.
Okay.
And I don't know if you see. Let's see. I got some books here. Got a Bible here.
Okay.
This isn't like, I don't know. Oh yeah, here's one. So yeah,
but all I'm saying is software engineering and Steve Jobs.
Oh yes, yeah, Steve Jobs there, software engineering. This is the God Particle by Leon Lederman, which is not a Christian book at all. He was the head guy at Fermilab for a long time. I've read this book 3 times. It's on the graviton, right? The God particle. Higgs boson.
The particle that's called something slightly longer than the God particle, but the other word was omitted.
Oh yes, that one. And he references that in there. That book gives a really good rundown of the history of quantum and particle physics, really. And it came out quite a while before they discovered it at CERN. He was at Fermilab when he wrote that. So, and he talks actually a bit about this super collider that they had started to build in Texas, but then got canceled. That was going to be bigger than CERN. So anyway, that's a good book. So, all right, other than we can see too far, because those discussions always go forever. Other than we can see too far, what's your favorite or best flat Earth observation?
What's the favorite or best flat Earth observation other than we can see too far? While I'm thinking, because I can think while I talk, I'll question the phrasing of "we can see too far." I would say that the problem isn't that we can see too far, but rather that we can see too low. And the observation there would be that if the Earth were round, then some of the observations we can currently make, we'd be looking through a rather tall body of water. So it's not really a distance issue so much as it is a curvature issue. As for the argument I find the most convincing myself, I would say it's the relative inability to observe the curvature by yourself in any major way. So there are effects that round earthers attribute to curvature indirectly, but the actual matter of fact, here you go, here's how it curves kind of situation is very difficult to directly observe by the human eye. And thus, to me, as someone who is driven by observation, that would probably at least put you on the path of questioning whether it's there. Not necessarily entirely convert you, but kind of start signaling that there might be something there to be found.
Yeah, enough to begin investigating is maybe another way. Yeah. Okay. What's the worst flat Earth claim? Something that's ridiculous.
The worst flat Earth claim. Okay. Let's get myself a few more controlled opposition points there.
I've asked it to everybody I've interviewed, so
I don't like the side of the flat Earth community that claims that gravitational effects are caused by things like buoyancy or the never-ending things just fall down.
Dropity?
That to me is it's missing something. It isn't an explanation. It's just a statement. Things just fall down. Yes, they do. I can pick up something from my desk and drop it, and it just falls down. But that doesn't explain why that happens, and it isn't an answer to the question. So I would say that probably doesn't help. There's been interesting arguments about the different possible gravitational models. I think one that Bob Nodell from Globebuster has brought to me was that it's actually caused by electromagnetism, which I also find it difficult to believe, because that would be one heck of an electric shock you would be getting from the Earth every single time you touch it, if you had an electromagnetic force of a magnitude significant enough to actually keep us on the ground. So I think the other attempt at explaining gravity, other than universal acceleration, is probably the one that I find the most strange.
Okay.
Another
I'm
example. Can I do two?
Oh, sure.
Another example that I think falls under the same "it doesn't answer the question" is the "space isn't real" answer. If space isn't real, or if planets aren't real, or if stars aren't real, that's missing a follow-up to me. I'm not necessarily saying that it is 100% wrong, but it hasn't conveyed any information. So if you were saying space isn't real, what does that actually mean? What do you mean by not real? In the same way, when you asked me whether the sun and moon are physical objects, I didn't understand what the alternative would be. They must be physical objects because we can physically see them.
Yeah.
So I find this ambiguity and vagueness to be somewhat infuriating and to be somewhat difficult to handle.
Well, I'm with you there.
There we go. We've reached some agreement.
Yeah. Yes. So then to flip that around, then what's the silliest or the worst flat or round Earth claim? Something that we often say that's definitely not right.
I have seen this photograph on the internet, and it shows an excessive amount of curvature. The Earth is so curved, and therefore it must be round. There's the Everest photo that I sent you a link to an article about before our conversation, which has very obviously been taken with a GoPro, and it produces an extremely exaggerated level of curvature, one that wouldn't be correct under even under round Earth mainstream science. It's obviously not representative. It's just optics. It's just how wide angle lenses work.
Yeah.
And people look at it and they think that that is a physical representation of the Earth. That is what you would see if you were to climb Mount Everest. And that's because most people haven't seen the Earth from high up.
Yeah, now Everest is not as high as planes go.
Exactly.
So people often are in planes, and we don't see that much curve.
I would go as far as to say that with your naked eyes, you probably don't see any curve unless you really convince yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
And yet, and it's one that hasn't left. It keeps coming back. I've logged into both Facebook and Twitter today, and I've received 2 messages on each of these channels showing me that Everest photo and saying, "Oh, look, this disproves your notion." It doesn't. Regardless of anything else, even if the Earth were round, this does not prove it.
Yep. Yeah, and I've when I've talked to people, they're like, What do you do on YouTube? I'm like, well, I do these videos. They're like, oh, well, just look out a plane window. I'm like, no,
you won't see anything.
Yeah, that's not going to do it. So, okay. And then what do you think is the best round Earth claim or argument?
That's always difficult, because if I thought that there was a very good round of argument, one that really convinced me, then I wouldn't be a flat earther. The argument that I think has the potential of being strong is possibly, maybe, asterisk, 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 the space industry. There are, as far as I can see, 2 possibilities. Either the space industry is thriving and it is going to show us incorrect at some point in the future, or the space industry is not thriving and it is some unscrupulous joke that is trying to drain society out of money for as long as they can until they disappear. If it were the former, there will eventually be such a time that either of the arguments will be proven correct and we will just have to accept it. But the one thing that makes me think that it is not such a convincing argument is that we've been having these conversations since the 80s, and people have been saying, any moment now, you'll be able to hop on a rocket, go to space, and see it immediately, and it just isn't happening.
Yeah, there've been 8 people so far that have been called space tourists. I put them on my website at mctoon.net. I have a space tourism page, and I believe it, but it's $20 million that they paid to be up there for a week. It's not very attainable for anybody.
Yeah.
So,
and at the same time, while this is all happening, and again, this is something that we get on the Flat Earth Society forum a lot, is people stopping by for the first time, not having really looked into what the discussion is about, and going, the space industry is about to prove you wrong any moment now. And the funny thing is, when I joined the Flat Earth Society in, I think it was 2009 or 2010, those posts were there, and it's 2019, and those posts are still there, and they look exactly the same, and it's just like, I will believe it when I see it, and when your list at mctoon.net includes Pete Svarrior, that's when I will be very happy to say, okay, fine, I've seen it. Until then, I remain healthily skeptical.
So, yeah, they're saying, is it Virgin Galactic has sold a bunch of seats, they're saying, and there are only 250,000. So it's still hard. Like, you can't just do that for fun. That's an expensive amusement park ride.
That's a house.
Yeah. So it'd have to come down. It'd have to be so that everybody knows somebody that's been there. Right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, my uncle was there, or my friend was there. How many times can you deny that? But that's a lot of people have to go.
Even then, there's discussions right now. Elon Musk is suggesting that for intercontinental travels and that kind of stuff, we should just put people on rockets. And it's, logistics aside, and the fact that it's not the rocket flight that would be the difficult part to arrange there. It's just there's all those loud promises, and they just don't seem to be happening.
Yeah. It's slow progress, and yeah. All right. Well, that's fair. So we talked about challenges, and you brought up the 2 things. One was the picture of Everest.
Mm-hmm.
And if my editing works right, then it'll be on the screen right now, and otherwise, I don't know if I'll edit it in or not. But it is a very round picture at the top there, and I don't know. It's not much of a challenge. That picture is clearly a fisheye lens.
I think that, as I said in my message, it's not so much of a challenge, but rather something that I really wanted to stress, and I kind of wanted to push as a message while I'm having this opportunity here to say that there's a whole lot of terrible logic on the round Earth side. And this is not to diminish the terrible logic that's coming from the Flat Earth side at times. This is not to diminish the good logic that's coming from either of the sides, but rather to try and debunk that myth that there are two sides of the conversation, and one of them is ultimately reasonable and one of them is ultimately unreasonable. And you can fill in the gaps for whichever group you support and don't, but either direction you take it, you're going to find some really, really mistaken people on both sides. So the examples that I picked was the Everest photo and the falling slinky experiment, both of which are just a misunderstanding of what's being proposed on both sides.
Yes. So the falling slinky was, let's see, I don't have, oh, there it is. I have the video.
I think the first half of it is just people talking, and then it shows examples of a slinky falling off a bridge, and they try to present how this would work under the universal acceleration model, and it just misunderstood what would be happening.
Yeah. So why don't you would you cover the universal acceleration model of on what it replaces, how it replaces gravity?
Yes. So effectively, I mean, if you go to our FAQ, you will see this. But of course, I appreciate that this is for the video as well, and not just for you. It's effectively it's a response to the unending round Earth question, and it's a question that any flat earther will have to answer of if the gravitational model as mainstream science accepts it were true, then the Earth would inevitably be pulled into a spherical shape sooner or later, or something that is roughly spherical. As such, it is essentially an impossibility for any flat earther to accept the mainstream gravitational model, because it would by default disprove the flat Earth. So aside from the responses that you will more commonly find on YouTube and Twitter, there is the universal acceleration model, which effectively suggests that the Earth is accelerating in the direction that we know as up, at the rate of roughly 9.8 meters per second squared. And thus, if you move between inertial and non-inertial frames of reference, to a local observer that is either on Earth or immediately above it, it will appear as if they were falling, even though they aren't. It's everything else that's moving up. But obviously, that's just a matter of which frame of reference you choose. The two scenarios are equivalent.
Yes. So, and the new people on the forum always pop in, and they have the same question. They say within a year, we'd go faster than the speed of light. And I don't have a problem with your answer. I think it's a good answer. Could you go over that?
So I will start by pointing out that I am a measly engineer and I do computer science. I am not a physicist, so my explanation will be rather simplified. But by and large, the counter argument here is that this is not how special relativity works. As you approach frames of reference that are moving at something that's quite close to the speed of light, for an observer within that frame of reference, the acceleration is still possible. So the acceleration that the observer that's internal to the frame of reference is experiencing will be very different from the acceleration that someone external to that frame of reference would see. And it's really quite unintuitive, and unless you go quite deep into special relativity, there's no really easy way of explaining that. But once you look at the Lorentz transformations, once you go through the mathematics that backs that up, that is exactly what would happen to a body that is moving somewhat close to to the speed of light from an external observer's perspective.
Yes, I agree.
I think that just about made sense.
Yeah, and from an external observer, the mass of the things accelerating as they get close to the speed of light get larger.
Yes.
And so the proportional, the acceleration is the same, even though the change in speed is not the same.
Well,
because of the mass.
Yeah, well, the acceleration and change of speed would be the same as the force that would be the same externally, and the acceleration would therefore lower as the mass goes up.
Yeah. So they'd never hit the speed of light, but still have that same experience inside the frame of reference. So there's still problems with that, and challenges that people have brought up. But I don't know if you're interested, come into the forum. So, and you also brought up then some of the problems with gravity.
Yes, so effectively the issue there is that even if we were to take the Roundorf model at its face value, and if we were to say that general relativity describes that section of physics as well as it can be explained, and it covers the entirety of our knowledge of the subject, we have now found that there are multiple anomalies, things like the flyby anomaly, in which certain objects get flung away from other celestial bodies at speeds that are massively, excessively higher than they should be if orbital mechanics and if general relativity worked as it is currently understood. And as such, it is relatively well understood within the physics community and within academia that further investigation is required into the subject. Simultaneously, we teach general relativity as gospel and as something that is to be understood to be a perfect representation of reality in the schools. So the question that I really wanted to ask there is, do you think that there might be something in there in terms of, are we perhaps a little bit too hasty to teach a model that is quite clearly and quite officially understood to be incomplete?
Yeah. And the flyby one I had not heard of before, but I read there's a good article on Wikipedia on the flyby anomaly, and showing things like I wouldn't say it was a big difference. They're saying they're gaining the Rosetta. Let's see this one here. The Near Earth Asteroid Rendezvous spacecraft had 13.46 millimeters per second faster than they thought it would be. So that's not a lot, but the fact that they could measure that is I don't know if I have any doubts about the accuracy of the measurement, but it's inconsistent too. Some are 1.8 millimeters per second, and some are none, and some are more. So, I would say there are flaws in the model of gravity for sure. The other obvious thing where there's something missing is dark matter and dark energy.
Certainly.
It doesn't present a problem to me. So what I think, if we just go back to Newtonian gravity before Einstein was around, it worked up to a point, right? It didn't work for everything, and then as we got to understand things more, we're like, yeah, there's some holes here, but it still works for everything that we experience day to day. We don't find any problems because we're not normally traveling at the speed of light or near the speed of light. So Einstein and the relativity theory of relativity came along and explained another big chunk of it, right? And for this big set of problems, it answered it. And at the time, I don't know if there were things unanswered yet, because these are the dark matter and flyby anomalies are newer than Einstein, to the best of my knowledge. All these things are. So my take is, there's another. In order to continue, there has to be another explanation, another understanding, something that has to put dark matter and flyby anomalies and all the holes that we have in place. I don't see it as a challenge to a spherical Earth model versus a flat Earth, because they kind of all presume, right, that the round Earth, right? There's no flyby of Jupiter if Jupiter doesn't exist in the way that we think it does, right?
I wouldn't say that Jupiter doesn't exist.
What's that?
I wouldn't say that Jupiter doesn't exist. I would say that is an exaggeration.
That Jupiter is an exaggeration?
No, I would say that so you just said that we have to assume that Jupiter exists. We can't assume that Jupiter doesn't exist. I would say that is quite an exaggeration.
Okay. So, all right, I want to make it more clear then. So like, if there's satellites that have been launched and they're in space and orbiting the Earth and orbiting other planets and doing a flyby of Earth, that kind of presupposes or requires that Earth isn't flat. At least in how I can fathom that.
I wouldn't necessarily agree. It is in my mind completely feasible that our experience and what we are currently seeing is being misinterpreted as the round Earth model being correct, but that the reality doesn't actually require for the Earth to be flat, to be round, and that even if we assume that everything that's been said is actually happening, that doesn't necessarily require the Earth to be round. It just requires for an experience that is similar enough to the round Earth model that it will be indistinguishable.
Okay. On the wiki, the space agency stuff, that kind of sounds similar, like and you said that you'd written that, so some of the wiki, so maybe that was what you wrote. So I'm just saying it sounds familiar, but strange.
I mean, the logic you would see on the wiki is going to be quite close to mine, even if it was Tom who wrote it, because we're not actually that far apart in terms of beliefs and in terms of views. I think he subscribes a little bit more to a lot of the work that was done immediately after Robotham, so I think he's moved away from the AE map into the bipolar map and that kind of stuff. But omitting those admittedly significant differences, the general mode of thinking, and I think this is true for most people who stuck around with the Flat Earth Society. We are a community of like-minded individuals, so yes, if any of this logic sounds familiar to you, I would say that is probably expected.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of disagreement with what you've brought up, though. There's holes in the model and some things unexplained. So I would agree, if people are being taught that relativity completely answers everything, then no, I don't see that to be a good thing to teach. Though at a low level, you gloss over things when you're teaching, right? I teach my kids math, and I'm not getting into differential equations and deriving formulas for them. They're not there yet. So
you don't necessarily have to delve into the equations, though. You can just signal that this stuff exists which I think is what we're missing in the educational system. I mean,
Sure.
I'm a little bit into teaching myself, and I've been doing a lot of sort of entry-level computer science stuff. So introducing tools that they will learn more about later on, and they will develop a much better understanding of. But I still need to bring them in and explain why those tools exist, why they're going to be using them, and how to do the very basics of them, even if that just scratches the surface of the subject. I want for them to have an appreciation of why it's there, and then say, I actually do not have the time nor resource to teach you everything, but here is the starting point. You can now go and learn by yourself, or you can wait for further courses that will expand on this stuff. Do with it what you may. But I would never teach someone a concept within programming or within computer science and then not mention that there is much more to it. And I think that is what we are missing in the sciences and in fundamental compulsory teaching.
Yeah, I agree. So, okay. We're going to move on. I sent you a reference to a post, a recent post that somebody had put on the Flat Earth tfes.org, titled "The Sun Rising Exactly East for All Observers on the Earth During the Equinoxes." And I think I sent you something, but I like to narrow it down to just what's observed on the equator on the equinox.
Mm-hmm.
The AE map is the most common. So my take on it is that the sun is observed to rise almost directly due east and travel in a straight line overhead, and then set almost exactly due west on the day of the equinox on the equator. And this is something that's you can confirm yourself. People have documented it for a long time. You can go to suncalc.org. The Stellarium application does that, and ancient peoples near and on the equator have celebrated this. In particular, if you go to Quito, Ecuador, they've had festivals there for quite a while, celebrating the this observation that they've had. So, if the sun travels straight overhead and it rises due east and sets due west everywhere along the equator, and everybody has that same observation, then the equator has to be straight. Otherwise, and if the other is that the sun is traveling above the equator. Getting a text message here. What is your take on that?
Okay, so I think I would have to start by questioning the universality of this observation, and I think my very first point there being that you've mentioned that people in Quito have had celebrations for this for a very long time. I am not entirely convinced that the people of Quito had a very good concept of what due east and due west means. And I do not think that you would find a credible historical account of them remarking, oh, look, the sun is rising due east right now and it is setting due west. I got those the right way around, didn't I? Yes, I did. Good.
Yeah.
Sorry, thinking about foreign languages, sometimes those things get mixed up in your head, and I really wouldn't want to say that the sun rises in the west and then look like a complete such and such. So I think their celebrations were most likely to do with the length of night and day, which isn't entirely the same thing. Current observations.
Right, so if we discount those and instead just go with the observations, the recent observations in the last what we can reliably say has been documented.
Yeah, so restricting ourselves to current modern observations is not exactly due east and due west. It is within several degrees, sometimes quite significantly off from exactly due east and due west. And that is understandable under even the round Earth model. You know, you've got refraction, you've got diffraction, you've got scattering, you've got a lot of factors to account for in the round Earth model that would make that correct. So I'm not saying that this inaccuracy disproves the round Earth, rather saying that the inaccuracy is to be expected. But obviously that puts us into a premise that we're discussing that's not 100% correct. It is an approximation of sorts, and it is an approximation that I think is quite generous to the round Earth cause. On top of that, and I think in the thread that you've referenced, and I think it's probably wise to include a link in the video description when you actually publish it, so that what I'm saying actually makes sense. Tom Bishop's responses more or less cover my thoughts. I mean, there is the assumption that you would be able to see the sun at the very moment that sunlight reaches the point of the observer. But that is not the case. If you've ever observed the sunrise or a sunset, it is, you know, the moment the sun appears to rise from the horizon is not the moment you first receive sunlight. You have probably been in the light for quite a while when that happens. You're looking at least an hour since it started getting light when the sun actually starts popping over the horizon. So it would be unfair to say that you are comparing, you know, if you looked at an overhead image of how the light is proposed to shine over the flat Earth, that the moment the light touches you is when you should see the sun. We know that is not the case. We know that sunlight scatters enough to illuminate your location for quite some time before it pops up. On top of that, specifically, and this is model specific, but with the electromagnetic acceleration model, in which light also bends in the upward direction, that would further delay the physical appearance of the sun from where sunlight first hits you. So you would actually be looking at the sun rising when it is much closer to you than the assumption that's been made in this thread. Now, I haven't made the observations myself. I haven't made the measurements, so I do not know whether that would account for all of this. And it is very possible that there are more variables there to consider. But I am not immediately convinced by the reasoning that's being presented. I feel that the reasoning that's being presented is very generous to the round Earth model and very ungenerous towards the flat earthers.
So, 2 to 3 degrees off for the round Earth model, right? And what if we round up to 5? The problem I see is for the AE map, the sun is 45 degrees northwest, or northeast. 6 hours before local solar noon. So that's where its actual location is supposedly at. So 45 degrees is pretty generous. The observation is that it's somewhere it's 0 degrees plus or minus, it's due east plus or minus 5. Mm-hmm. We still have 40 degrees to make up.
But that is under the assumptions of the thread, so I'm already suggesting that the sun is quite a lot closer to you by the time you're able to see it than what's being proposed by the thread.
Sure, but you still see 12 hours of sunlight that day, or very close to it. You see...
would, but the beginning of that sunlight period would be long before you see the sun rise, and the end of that period would be long after you see the sun set.
You mean like seeing light on the horizon for more than
seeing light at your location? So,
I mean from when you first see the disk of the sun rising above the horizon, not just the sunlight, but actually see the sun. And if you want, take when you first see the entire disk of the sun above the horizon, because it's 8 to 10 minutes. Right? So that's still pretty close to 12 hours of the sun, the disk of the sun being visible on that day. Right?
I'm not entirely convinced that that is the case. I think that the amount of time during which you can see sunlight before you see the disk of the sun is quite a lot more than you're accounting for. And I think when we're looking at these inaccuracies, and I admit I haven't identified all of them, but it is a game of stacking inaccuracies, and I think if you accounted for enough of them, the actual game would be a toss-up between the two. I think the fact that we are assuming a very idealistic model of the round Earth, and we are pretty much taking for granted that is exactly what you're seeing, is an attempt at stacking the argument in advantage of one side. And I'm not entirely sure that is productive or helpful.
Okay. Well, I'd love to explore it maybe in a thread on there. I know maybe you don't do a lot of... you seem to do more moderating than commenting.
I think it's a product of the fact that I'm doing so many things. So I've been...
Busy, yeah.
I used to be massively active on the forum, and then I've taken on Facebook, I've taken on Twitter, I started responding to emails from the media, and suddenly, before you know it, the time for posting on the forum itself is really diminished. But it's not to say that I don't read it and that I don't get involved when I feel that I have a strong point to make. A lot of the time, I'll read a conversation and I'll see that there are others who are already making the points I would make myself, and restating the same point wouldn't necessarily be particularly helpful.
Yep. All right. Well, I like that one. And Tom Bishop, he tends to like the bipolar model that has a straight equator. I don't know if he's moved on from that more lately, but
no, I think he is mostly on that side. But
okay. I think
being the kind of person that he is, he's also going to argue for models that he doesn't agree with.
Oh yeah, I tell you, I'm not convinced, Tom. I'm not convinced. I don't know. But so the equator is straight on the bipolar model. But nothing else is, and I think the bipolar model brings up more problems than it solves, because the AE map solves a lot of the sun movement, solves seasons, solves the ability, I don't know, eclipses a little bit, and so
I will readily admit that my understanding of the bipolar model is surface level, so I wouldn't want to get too much into it, because again, I try not to talk about things that I know nothing about. In the same way that I mentioned that I would very much like to document stationary flat earthism, but I am not going to be the one to write it because I don't know about it.
Yep. So you've said that you're primarily, or at least in some way, the Twitter is yours. The Twitter at what is it?
It's Flat Earth Org.
Flat Earth Org, yeah. And so was it? I don't know. You don't need to answer if you don't want to. But there was, I think, of the tweet that you've got members all around the world, or all around the globe.
So, okay, might as well answer that one. I'm just trying to put my thoughts together. First of all, it's a Facebook post, not a Twitter post.
Okay.
Secondly, it doesn't include our logo. It includes the logo of the other Flat Earth Society.
Okay.
Thirdly, I am not at all convinced that it is a real post at all. And there are a few reasons for that. So, the post that we supposedly made, but we didn't make, that the other group supposedly make, but I think they also didn't make, all we have for it is terrible quality screenshots. I have never
Okay.
seen an archive.org link, for example.
I-
If you look at archive.org right now, and if you try to look at our Twitter feed or at our website or at our forum or at our Facebook or anything, those are archived almost daily because people keep capturing snapshots of them. How is it that such a massive blunder hasn't been captured by any of the archive sites? How is it that nobody has anything other than a very low resolution screenshot, which, by the way, has been edited? So obviously it includes a response saying, say this again, but slowly.
yeah.
The name of the page that responds changes from screenshot to screenshot. And sometimes it's photoshopped in very poorly. It's an internet meme. There is absolutely nothing to it. There are both funnier and stupider things that I've actually said on Twitter that I wish were quite as popular.
Well, I didn't know. I'd only seen it in passing, and I took it as humor because I've seen some of what you've written, and I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like your humor. But all right. Well, it's good to get an explanation for that.
It's
I
one that
love
we
it.
can-
I think it puts some brevity into this topic that is missing.
The thing that's really annoying about jokes like that, when you are on the side that runs the social media for those things, is that you receive it about 200 times per day. And the humor very quickly wears off. You see it the first time and you go, okay, fair enough. You see it the 10th time and you go, this is getting a little bit old. And then 2 years later, people are still sending it to you. And it's like, I wish you could go away. I wish you could just you could take your joke and bring it to people who haven't heard it before. That's all great, but I really don't wish to hear it for the 201st time today.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those are roughly actually the numbers.
Wow.
There's this 4-panel comic of an asteroid hitting the flat Earth with dinosaurs on it, and then they get flung away because the asteroid hits the Earth and it spins around.
It tips it.
And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, the first time I saw it, it was funny. I can no longer bring myself to find the humor in it because it is being sent to me every single day in multiple copies. You can ruin any joke like that, you know. The
Sure.
funniest joke you know right now, if you get someone to tell it to you every day for the next year, you are going to hate it by the end of it. So I think that's where I appreciate the humor, and I know that it's there, but I have long lost the ability to see it myself.
Okay, that's fair. So I wrote these last couple questions thinking about YouTubers, but we'll see how it goes. Who's your favorite flat earther?
That's going to be a challenging one, mostly because I am mostly active on the forum side of things and not so much on other media. But I will try to avoid massively over promoting the Flat Earth Society here. So I'll restrict myself and I'll pick my favorite non-Flat Earth Society Flat Earther.
Okay.
And I think I would have to go for either Stacey McStationary or Ben Long, both of which are Twitter users.
Yeah, Ben Long with the sunglasses, the pixelated sunglasses.
He goes under Flat Earth Expert on Twitter.
Okay.
He's one of the most ardent critics of the Flat Earth Society, and he's one of the people who constantly get on our case over universal acceleration and finds it to be the most ridiculous thing and keeps demanding explanations. But I appreciate him because he tends to maintain a very level-headed approach to arguing with round earthers. And I think that's most important. If he's a little bit aggressive with me, I absolutely don't mind. I can handle aggression. I'm sure you've seen me handle difficult situations on the forum.
Yeah.
That is fine by me. But it's when we talk to those who don't necessarily agree with us, regardless of your position, that I think keeping it level, even if you're going to say, I disagree with you and I'm going to stop talking to you now, that is fine, as long as you've done so in a civil manner. And I think I would give him a lot of credit for that. And Stacey is quite similar. As per her name, she is a stationary flat earther. I'm quite sure that she disagrees with quite a lot of the stuff we say, but we have maintained cordial relations by and large. And again, I think that ability to disagree, but in a nice way, and to present information that supports your side without necessarily putting anyone else down is a quality that we would all benefit from.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll put both of their Twitter links in there. I can say that neither of them have blocked me, so
that's a start.
Yeah, that's good.
We'll see how long that lasts after I've mentioned you now.
Well, I think you're right. I've seen them plenty, and they're not echo chamber people. I've been blocked by a lot, and sometimes I take it as a badge of honor to get blocked. So
it's one of the reasons why I make a point of not blocking anyone on our Twitter.
Yeah.
Because I know some people view that as a sign of victory, and I don't want to give them the satisfaction, even if that's what they want.
Yep. And for my part, I've blocked the only people I've blocked are people that I follow that are off topic, right? So I used to maybe follow different people for, and like they're just posting constant stuff that I don't want to see in my feed because I'm not interested today, now, but not because I'm upset at them. So okay, who is your favorite globe head then, or baller, or whatever you want to call us?
I would. Okay, I'll start with an interjection because that's what I do. I think while I talk. I don't really like the term globehead, and I don't really like the term globe baller. It's just they seem like they're trying to put someone down, and I just don't see the benefit of this. I normally stick to round earther. I think that's about as neutral as it can get. If I really want to get slightly quirky about it, if I want to kind of add a winky face to it, I'll call them roundies. But I've got some flack for it. I've been called a flatty right back. So perhaps that is misplaced. As for who my favorite round earther is, I think I'll be a little bit cheeky. I'll go for the round earther that I think has advanced our cause the most, and I will go Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Okay.
And the reason I am naming Neil specifically is because he's released a hugely popular video on why he is strongly convinced that the Earth isn't flat, which immediately got picked apart by the Washington Post, where they conflicted what he was saying with our FAQ and pointed out that he is not actually responding to our claims and to our positions, but rather that he is going off of his own perception of what flat Earth would mean. Yeah,
I absolutely agree that like the guys that aren't in the debunking or globehead or whatever community, they don't know how to respond too well. Like we said earlier, they'll just say, well, just look out a plane window and you can tell. It doesn't work. And so, Neil has certainly early on, I don't know, maybe he's gotten schooled a little bit now, but he made some mistakes in wording that
I think it's not just wording. It's the fact that he stepped into the discussion and given his profile and given his popularity, he obviously immediately had a following, but the arguments that he presented didn't respond to any flat earthers' claims. And it's, whether you look at us, whether you look at the stationary earthers on Twitter or anything like that, he didn't do that. He took the round Earth model, took the Earth and squished it into a pancake and said, oh, this wouldn't work, and here's why. Gravity.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it doesn't matter who you ask. The standard gravitational model is not going to be a core tenet of the flat Earth theory. So if you want to respond to it, you have to look at what it proposes and present a counter-argument to it. Yeah. But you can't just create your own theory and say, oh, this is wrong. Which is essentially what he did, and this is why even mainstream media, even the Washington Post, without any intervention from us or from any other flat earthers, stepped in and said, well, you can look at this video, you can look at what the Flat Earth Society FAQ, here's why these aren't discussing the same subject. Which is great. I still keep getting questions about Neil's video and the fact that he has attempted debunking the flat Earth theory, and it's a fantastic way of just sending people to the FAQ and saying, have a look at what we're actually saying, make up your own mind. I'm not going to try and overly push it, because if I do, I'm only going to discourage you, but the information's there. Go ahead.
Yeah. I like that. Don't call up. I mean, maybe you want. It's best for you, but I say don't call up Neil or Bill Nye or whoever who is the popular science person when it comes to flat Earth, because it's too nuanced. And if you don't know the large backlog of information that the flat earther community has put forward, you're gonna get it wrong.
I think that's exactly it. I think it's I think if individuals of this sort of prominence were to respond to our actual claims, they could do it very well, but they would first have to do the research and they would have to familiarize themselves with it. And I don't think that they have quite understood the gravity of the situation and the level to which the discussion has evolved. And
hold on. Did you just say the gravity of the situation?
I can see you smirking at gravity. Yes, and the Flat Earth Society has members all around the globe, and so on and so forth.
It's a figure of speech.
Exactly. But besides, I mean, okay, slightly off topic, but we do maintain a difference between gravity and gravitation, in which gravity is the phenomenon of things falling down, and gravitation would be the hypothetical rounder force of mutual attraction of mass. So gravity itself is just things falling. But it's also something that I'm quite happy to joke about. I mean, if you look at my forum signature right now, it's a quote from another user that just says, "Mike remains stationary and the Earth accelerates up to meet it." So I'm completely fine with having a little bit of fun with the subject of gravity. But yes, I do think that they perhaps misunderstand the fact that quite a lot of thought has gone into these models and into this discussion. Even if they feel we're wrong, even if they think that we have been mistaken about every single thing that we've said, the only way that you can actually level a response against that is by identifying what it is that is being said. And I think that's what quite a few high-profile individuals are missing.
Yes. So, that there is another model of gravity where there's an infinite plane. I just thought I'd put that in because it works also potentially. But yeah, thanks.
Yes, I think that's quite commonly referenced by John Davis on the other forum. I think he's quite a strong infinite plane general relativity proponent.
Yeah.
So if anyone is interested in that area of thought, that's probably the person to speak to. He doesn't like me very much, but that's not going to stop me from mentioning him.
John Davis at so the other website would be theflatearthsociety.org.
That's right.
So members like myself on tfes.org, we know what the other site is. Well, okay. So we're getting close to the end here. Anything else comes to mind?
I think the main thing that comes to mind, and this is sort of detached from flat Earth thinking. It's the general thing that I say to people I interact with, and especially people that I try to teach, or I don't really teach. I work in higher education, so I help people learn. Would be a more accurate description, and the distinction, while subtle, is there. Is to stop and think. Oftentimes I'm asked a question, and it's a question that I understand where it's coming from, but I look at it and think, actually, you already know enough to figure it out. Don't ask me. Stop. Think for 10 minutes. Tell me what you're thinking, and I'll tell you if I think you're right. If I think you're wrong, I'll help you try and find my way of thinking or try to convince you that perhaps there is another way of thinking, but I would much rather have people come in and say what they think the case is, and then we can have a discussion comparing the two mindsets, than someone coming in and saying, explain this now. And I found this frustrating in every area of life. It's again, whether we're talking about a concept in mathematics or computer science or anything like that, when people just go, I don't know how to do X, tell me how to do X. Or whether it is newcomers to the flat earth theory going, how do you explain this particular phenomenon? Which is very difficult to answer if you don't have the broader context of what's being discussed. I would so much prefer if people stopped, read, thought, and then said, as far as I understand, you are stating this. This conflicts my intuition, or this conflicts my observations because of that. Can you either address this seeming contradiction or show me where I've gone wrong? Because then you have a much more productive mode of conversation, because you can either say, yes, you've made this certain assumption, and I think that assumption is mistaken, or to say, your assumptions are correct, but I'm not entirely sure that your logic follows from there on, and this is where we diverge. And you can have a comparison, you can have a meaningful logical discussion, whereas the current style of debate, especially on the internet, is you are wrong because of this thing, and you must defend it now. And it's like, that is not remotely what I believe. You have just asked me to defend something I don't agree with, and I'm not going to do that. That means you're conceding. No, it doesn't. It just means that I disagree with your core premise. And this is a conversation that, again, someone like me has daily, and I'm sure you get into that as well. I'm sure when you try to talk to some of the more aggressive flat Earth supporters, or any conspiracy believers, there are going to be certain people who will just say, if you can't explain this single thing, then everything you say is summarily wrong, and it doesn't matter what else you have to say. And I just think to both sides, I'm going to focus on round earthers because that's the side that I experience it from more, but I'm sure that is unique to my experience. Don't do that. Explain your thoughts. Give the other person a chance to respond to your thoughts and to show why they think you're wrong. You'll probably end up disagreeing. It's very unlikely that any conversation on the internet is going to lead to someone massively shifting their beliefs overnight, but give them a chance.
Yeah. Well said. I like that. Well, that wraps up what I have. I would encourage people that were curious to go over to tfes.org, join the forum, read for a while before you post a question, and do notice that the first day posters are annoying to everybody. Notice that the atmosphere there is very different than YouTube or Twitter. It's pretty cordial, and people are interested in having conversations, not just shouting at each other. So I like the atmosphere there. It's much less toxic than YouTube comments.
I'm glad that it looks that way from your perspective. I think that's feedback that we don't often receive, because most of the time people only say something when they're unhappy. So a lot of the time you only hear about things like, why was this person banned from the forum? They didn't do anything wrong, or why are you moving posts around different boards and that kind of stuff. It's always very difficult to actually establish whether everyone is still happy. So it's always good to hear.
Yeah, and I've spoken with Bobby Shafto as well, another roundie who's very active on there, and I was recently in San Diego, and I tried to connect with him, and we couldn't. He was out of San Diego when I was in San Diego, but
that's unfortunate.
He from what I've talked to, like he enjoys the atmosphere there too, and for me, he's the model for me for how to talk to people.
I think from what I know, Bobby doesn't like me very much. I think he feels that I have it out for him, because on a few occasions I've overruled some of his discussions and moved them down to the naughty corner.
Yeah,
And
I've seen those
I think
comments.
he's taken it particularly personally, which was never my intention. I think
Yeah.
the one thing to bear in mind with forum moderation is, in the end of the day, we are janitors and we are cleaning things up quite indiscriminately. So where he's seeing malice and where he's seeing sort of aggression, it's very much a case of, I look at the thread, I try to determine whether it is actually productive and whether it is actually something that we want to have in the top section of the forum, and if we don't then it has to go.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's often a shame. It's never a good job to be a moderator, because you do end
Nobody
up in
likes the moderator.
situations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm very much the guy that nobody likes, because a lot of the time people think that I have it out for them or something like that. And realistically, half of the time when someone tells me that I've been following them or persecuting them on the forum, I genuinely have no recollection of that, because they were probably the 20th post that I've gone through and deemed that it needs to be moved or removed or something like that.
Yeah.
Not removed. If they ever get moved out of the main forum, they get moved to the lower sections, but they never get deleted. Full stop. But of course, that's still, nobody likes having their post moved. Nobody likes being told that what they have just contributed is unwanted or something along those lines, which is also an overstatement. They're not unwanted. They are requested to adjust to help upkeep the tone that we try to maintain.
Yeah.
But it's an ungrateful job.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have that tone. And one more, if I can say, Max Almond on the forums there. He has a YouTube channel, Rory, who's recently been super active. He's putting out lots of videos. And he's also just a nice guy. Tries to not be insulting and have the right, have a good tone. So another model for that that I would like to see more roundies take. So, all right.
Okay.
That's what I got. Well, thanks a lot. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will include in the description appropriate links to Pete's information. And thanks a lot.
Thank you.